My theory is it's got to be a good story. That number one, first and foremost.
That's the through line.
And then when you've got them hooked with a good story and a good plot, you can sneak in some historical, like, and by the way. But if the novel was written as a sort of didactic, you must learn this, you must learn that, it's not going to work.
Hello and welcome to this week's episode of The Conversation with your host, Nadine Matheson. As always, I hope that you're well and I hope that you've had a good week. If I'm honest, I think last week was a bit intense, which is why I would like this podcast, The Conversation, to be your refuge. Every week, I have amazing conversations with brilliant guests and we talk about everything. And as my guests are always told before we start recording, it's not known for these conversations to go off on a tangent, but the tangent's always good. So I hope this podcast is a refuge. And as always, I thank you for your support. But there's also another way that you can support me. You can support me not only by liking the podcast and sharing it and recommending it and posting comments. If you're listening on Spotify, you can post comments to every individual episode and I see the comments and I'm able to respond. And people have been really good at leaving comments so far. So continue to do so. You can also support the podcast by buying me a cup of coffee on Ko-fi. Or if you don't like coffee, you can buy me a cup of tea. And honestly, for the price of a cup of tea or the price of a cup of coffee, you can support the podcast. And also when you click on the link and you're taken to the Ko-fi page, you will also see that there is merchandise, exclusive The Conversation merchandise that you can buy. And also signed copies of my books. And actually, speaking of my books, the third book in my Detective Inspector Angelica Henley series, The Kill List, is released in paperback this week on Thursday, the 30th of January, which coincidentally, not only is it the day after my birthday, which is on the 29th, it will be 2 years since the podcast, The Conversation with Nadine Matheson, was launched. So this is actually a very special episode because we're celebrating three things. We're celebrating my birthday on the 29th of January. We're celebrating the second anniversary of the Conversation podcast. And we're celebrating the release of the third book in my Detective Inspector Angelica Henley series, The Kill List. If you go down to the show notes, the links to The Kill List are there. And you'll see that the link goes directly to bookshop.org. And that's because it's important to support independent bookshops. So give me a present, like and share and recommend the podcast and buy my book and support me on Ko-fi. Right, let's get on with the show. This week, I'm in conversation with Lila Cain. And Lila Cain is actually the writing partnership of Marcia Hutchinson and Kate Griffin. And their book, The Blackbirds of St Giles, which is the first in the series, will be published on Thursday. And the link to purchase the book is also in the show notes. And I've always been fascinated about writing partnerships because how do two people actually sit down and write a book together? Especially when I think you may have two authors who have two completely different writing styles. And how do you decide who does what in terms of where the direction of the story goes, where individual character arcs go? I just find it fascinating, which is why it was an absolute pleasure to talk to Lila Cain, aka Marcia Hutchinson and Kate Griffin. And in our conversation, we talk about what it's like to write in a partnership, the mental gymnastics we perform as authors when dealing with imposter syndrome, and the intricacies of writing characters who have a different background to you. Now, as always, sit back or go for a walk and enjoy the conversation. Marcia Hutchinson and Kate Griffin, welcome to The Conversation.
Hello.
Thank you. Good morning.
Right, my first question for both of you is, what was your first thought in your heads when you were first approached with this project for your book, The Blackbirds of St Giles?
You go first, Marcia.
Well, it just seemed a bit weird. We had the same agent, and she said, would you be interested in working with another writer on this book? And I'm like, why? I honestly didn't think it would take off until I met Kate. and we just hit it off. So we met myself, Kate, Eugenie, and Eileen Maisel, who's the woman whose original idea it was to create the book. Eileen has sadly died, and we've dedicated the book to her.
Yeah.
But once the four of us got together and just started bouncing ideas off each other, I thought, it's a long shot, but it just might work.
Yeah, that's exactly how I felt as well. It's really strange. That's exactly as Marcia says, when Eugenie came to me and said, how do you feel about writing this book? I thought, why was my first, very much my first. And then she was quite canny. She kind of engineered a couple of meetings between us. And it was quite clear that, the awful thing is once Marcia and I get together, we don't stop talking. And as you may find later on. And yeah, it just kind of, as Marcia says, we just kind of it just span ideas out, didn't we? And and it was clear there was something there that we could take and work with together.
It's such an honest answer when I ask you what you think, and it's just like, why? Like, I think some people would feel pressurized to be like, I need to give a really diplomatic answer in response to this question. But and I think that would be my fault. I'd be like, why? Like, why are you asking me to write with someone? It's like, what do you want from this?
Yeah, and there was also some insecurity on my part, thinking, I don't know that I can add anything to the project, and it took a while to sort of get over myself. I think, that whole idea of we are good, we do have skills, and, I'm a writer. For years, I couldn't say the words "I'm a writer" without giggling afterwards. And now it's like, learn to take yourself seriously.
Yeah, that's important.
It is, because I know, Marcia, you're a lawyer as well, like I am. Yeah. And I always said that I found it in the early days of being published. I found it easier when people asked me what I did to say I'm a writer, not say I'm a lawyer. They're like, I'm a lawyer, I'm a solicitor. I would say that first, and then I'd mumble, I'm a writer, like afterwards.
Yeah, because the thing about being a solicitor is you've taken exams, you've got certificates, it's completely formal. You can literally hold up a certificate and go proof, whereas it's not quite that easy with a book.
No, I was a communications manager for years for a heritage charity. Yeah. And I was so disappointed because no one knows what that is. Let's face it, communication is such a nebulous area. And on the passports, when you used to have like your profession and you could write, and I was so excited about writing author as my profession, and it changed. You can't write that anymore. So I'm so sad.
It depends where you go, because when I go back to Grenada, they still ask you on the form, on the immigration form, what you do as a profession. So but the thing, it took me even till recently, I was still putting down lawyer, because I thought I didn't want them, because like my parents, I say my parents, my mum, she's very heavy into politics, and she's very vocal about the politicians and the MPs. And I thought, if I put down I'm a writer, they're probably going to think I'm coming to the country to do some kind of expose. So I still put lawyer down. Kate, when did you become comfortable? Well, were you always comfortable calling yourself a writer?
No, exactly as Marcia says, imposter syndrome. I know a lot of people talk about imposter syndrome, but it is very real because, all of a sudden you're doing something that you may have secretly dreamed about doing for a long time. And it takes years, I would say, for you to actually acknowledge yourself and accept that this is what you're doing. So, I've written quite a few history books, which is why Marcia and I made a good mix for this one. But even when I was writing them, I was still working as a communications manager. Yeah. And I didn't, kind of for a long time, if people exactly as you say asked me what I did, I would say, I work for a charity. I didn't, I didn't feel confident enough. And also, it seems a little bit arsey, doesn't it? If somebody says to you, really, genuinely, you go to a dinner party or something, if they exist still, and people say, so what do? You go, I'm an author, don't you know? It just sounds wrong.
It sounds really pretentious.
Absolutely.
It's ridiculous, though, that, I say sitting here as 3 grown women, and you're still having to go through this thought process of, well, should I say this is what I do, or this is what I want to do? Am I going to sound pretentious? Are people going to think I'm stuck up and asking and saying to themselves, well, who do you think you are? You want to be a writer?
And I do wonder, this is probably wandering off into a territory, but I wonder if a man would feel the same sometimes.
I don't think they do, because I don't know if I was talking to someone or I read it somewhere. And they was basically saying how a man, if they said, I want to fly a plane, a woman would be like, well, I need to take lessons. I don't think I'm qualified. I need to do all this. Whereas a man would be like, yeah, I can fly a plane. Of course I can.
What can be so hard?
Yeah, like
women
what could be
tend
so hard?
Yeah, men
Easy.
tend to overestimate their abilities and women tend to underestimate their abilities.
I think that's true. And I don't want to be controversial about it or sexist about it, which it is, but I do think that women kind of like genuinely kind of take a step back and feel, and I think women feel embarrassed about their achievements a lot. And I think this is exactly what Marcia and I, are kind of feeling, really.
Marcia, because I think, is it your debut, your own individual like debut novels out is it in the summer?
In July, yeah.
In July. So did you feel the fact that you hadn't had a book out yet? Did you think that kind of, I'm not saying affected you, but made you think twice about taking on this project?
Well, sort of, partly because it was my agent had signed me for what was hopefully going to be my debut, and then introduced me to Kate. And I did sort of feel like the junior partner, Griffin and Hutchinson solicitors. But in some ways, it's sort of coincidental that my debut comes out in the same year. But I do feel that now I've got my own name on a book, because Kate's written 4 books. I feel that, I can. I'm a writer in my own right, as well as Heart of Lila Cain.
Yeah,
but that's a nice position though, to have like 2 books coming out in a year.
I keep saying it's like if you spend 5 years waiting for a bus and then 3 come along at once, and it's like, spend ages waiting for a book deal, and now there's 3. There's Blackbirds, my solo debut, and then next year is the second, the sequel to Blackbirds. So we've got a 2-book deal on Blackbirds.
Yeah.
I think
so we're writing it now. In fact, I should be writing my chapter now.
Well, this is what I want to ask. This is what I want to ask you about, because you're not the only couple, who write together, and because there's so many books out there. When you look behind the author name, you realise, it's actually 2 people. And I'm just always interested. How does it actually work? Is one person doing a chapter? I don't know. How does it work?
Well, it was almost accidental. We sat down and the first meeting was buzz, buzz, buzz. Oh, here's an idea, there's an idea. And at the end of the first meeting, I thought, yes, I can work with this woman. I came away thinking, I think I can work with her. And then we sat down and we basically plotted the book. So we came up with the overall plot, we came up with the characters, and I think what I bring to the team is a sort of more in-depth knowledge of Black history, and what Kate brings is this in-depth knowledge of London and London history, and we batted ideas and characters backwards and forwards. And then when it came to, so I think we came up together with the skeleton. Yeah. And then when we were deciding, all right, how are we going to write it? At the time, I was running for election as a local councillor, so I was knocking on doors every week. And I said very generously, I said, Kate, you write it. And you write each chapter, send it to me, and then I'll go through each chapter. And that's how we've worked. And literally 4 p.m. every Friday, it was this woman's work ethic. Oh, gosh.
Well,
would arrive and I would go through it and I'd be like, no, I'm not sure about that. And what about this? And, I would never question anything on the details of London history, because I think, well, that's Kate's area. But when it came to anything to do with African history, Black people, that kind of thing, that was like, I'm on it. I'm like, no, not gosso.
We did argue. So,
a lot.
Well, you know what?
You're right. But...
No, because when I was, when I'm like going through the book and I'm going through my questions, and it was that one, like an interview question that kept popping into my head. If you've been interviewed for a job, now, can you work well in a team?
Yeah.
So I thought I need to put that question to them. Can you work well in a team?
You do. I think right at the beginning, I think we did kind of like stalk around each other like a couple of cats who were kind of like, seeing, is this my kind of cat kind of thing, really. But I think we realised pretty early on that, yes, we were each other's kind of cat and that it was fine. But then but I think it's important, if you're part of a writing partnership, to fight as well. And to fight for your corner when you know you're right. And Marcia was always right, to be perfectly honest with you. I would think I'd created
she's learned
a fantastic scene that was terribly dramatic. And then Marcia would say, yeah, but actually a black woman would never do that or feel that. And I would say, why not? Bristle, bristle, bristle. And then she would explain and I would go, oh, okay, all right then. And then I'd go back and kind of like, rewrite that scene and then bat it up to Marcia, and then Marcia would rewrite that scene.
So you had maybe a scene like somebody was really nervous and tense, and as they gripped the seat, the whites of their knuckles, and I'm like, if they're black, they ain't got no whites in their knuckles.
Not.
And that's ignorance on my part, really.
But it's that granular detail which, if a white person has written black characters, they start to seep in.
Mm-hmm.
And the ringlets, and it's like, my hair doesn't go in ringlets. Look, which ringlet?
Only when it's washed, when it's literally dripping wet. Mine will.
And it was more getting into the character of a black narrator, which I think is where I really came in, and just understanding and looking at this novel from a black perspective. So if you were talking about a character, you wouldn't need to mention their skin color if they were black. You only need to mention it if they're white, because if you take black as the default setting, which obviously doesn't happen these days, but you think, okay, if you're looking at this from a black character's perspective, you don't need to keep pointing out X and Y are black. You only need to say, and so, a white person came along. And it's really sort of making sure that because
trying to invert it.
Like looking at it like that,
no, that was interesting.
I had a comment once on, I think, what book it was the first book I self-published, The Sisters, and someone it was on Goodreads. So back in the days when I used to read the Goodreads comments, and someone wrote, oh no, they did it as well with the Jigsaw Man, so my crime fiction debut as well. Someone said, oh, well, you didn't say that the main character was black on the first page, like you didn't, and go down to say you didn't just say they were black and you didn't describe their complexion. My response was, that's because looking at myself, I don't wake up in the morning, look in the mirror and say, who is a black woman today? Exactly. So,
that's a surprise every morning.
What a surprise! Yeah. So why would I have my black character doing that? Because that's just not how you operate. And then yesterday I was having a conversation. A friend of mine is from Tanzania, and we was talking about like application forms, and in the United Kingdom and possibly in the States, you'd have to fill out, where exactly you're from, if you're Black British, Black Caribbean, Black African. There's so many different boxes. And she was saying in Tanzania, that just doesn't exist on the form. And I was saying in Grenada, I don't think it exists on the form either. So you're not, if a black person, you're not being forced to examine your blackness every single day of the week.
It's like Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie said she only realised she was black when she went to America, because in Nigeria you didn't have to go,
no, that's I think another interesting thing actually about the whole process of when we were writing it was during the second lockdown as well.
Oh, was it?
So we kind of met, didn't we, Marcia? And we had kind of like a lovely time at Claridge's, of all places, where Eileen took us, lovely Eileen Maisel. She wanted to talk about the project. And then we were all fired up. And then the second, when Boris Johnson cancelled Christmas. So then Marcia and I were kind of like all fired up about writing our book together. And then Marcia lives in Manchester and I live in St Albans. It's like 250 miles or so between us. So it was like, what did we do? So we Zoom. I mean, I remember over that first January, I think it was January and a bit of February, we had like regular Zooms, and then we kind of realised that we both like a glass of wine with our Zooms. So we like chat. And it became, and actually it was one of those lifesaver things, I think, for everyone.
Yeah.
Because I love chatting to Marcia. And eventually, we chat about our lives, and then we'd realise we chatted rather a lot about our lives. Then we go, so that's So, we we became sort of friends by default through that period, I think. When people
needed you're talking to every week. So we'd do the book and then we'd go off on all sorts of other things. Yeah. And as it turns out, we're almost exactly the same age.
Yeah.
And have lots of other things in common. So there's a lot to...
and I think for both of us, it's been a really interesting learning experience as well. I mean, I have learned so much from Marcia about language, about presentation, about actually individual grainy words that you can use. It's been I've felt quite privileged actually. So
did you learn anything about yourself? Kate, I was going to ask, did you learn anything about yourself? You know, when Marcia was saying earlier about, she can talk about things or write about things from a Black perspective, and obviously you can write about, say, the history of London. But did you learn anything about yourself in that process of writing with another person and writing the book?
What I learned is I thought that I was a very liberal white person who was like very aware of all forms of prejudice, and I learned from Marcia that I'm not, and that a lot of us take for granted, our liberal credentials. And actually, I think I learned to listen actually from Marcia. That was a really important thing, and it took me quite a long time to. That.
No, that's really honest of you, Kate. Yeah, because I think when you come to a project like I did, when we sat around the table, there was myself, a Black woman, Kate, Eugenie, a white woman, and Eileen, a white woman. So we're kind of outnumbered 3-1 here. And they're all saying, we want you to bring your perspective to the project, please say, if anything, yada, yada, yada. But the first few times I read something in the text, I still felt, ooh, can I say? And gradually my confidence built, and I'm like, no, we're not having this. And it took quite a while. What do they say about groups? Forming, norming, storming, and performing. Oh, you not heard that one before?
No, I love it.
I'm still learning from you. You sort of come together as a group, you form, then you develop your routines, the norming. Then the storming, it's where you start arguing and you feel confident enough to say, no, I'm going to stand my ground on this, I disagree. And then the performing is where we're just motoring nicely. Yeah. And I think we're performing now, but the storming was hard because I'd read a chapter and think, when you come across something, it's not even a microaggression. I'm sort of talking to you, Nadine, and it lodges, but you don't really think about it till later. No. And then you think, oh, hang on a minute, I'm not happy about it.
It kind of grates. That's what I describe. It kind of grates on you when you're like, you need to process it.
Yeah, because straight away, in the moment, you don't quite have the words. You just have the sensation, the feeling. And it's your gut that's telling you, but your gut isn't necessarily translating stuff into words. And the other people are saying, oh, do say. And you can't say, I just have a feeling. That's not exactly saying. But then finally, when I did get to it, I would then go back to Kate and say, you know what we said in that chapter? I don't think I was happy about that. Because I think there was one area, probably their first arguments, where Kate wanted to illustrate how badly the protagonists were treated, and like someone spat at them in the street. And I was like, can we just have the one spitting? We don't need everybody they pass hawking and spitting at them. And she's like, I want to demonstrate. And I'm like,
I need to show it.
We got, I think Patterson Joseph, who's just wonderful, who narrated the book, talked about sort of the porn of seeing violence done to Black bodies. And I haven't found his exact, and I just thought, that's it. You can illustrate it without constantly having them go through these awful scenarios. Yeah. So I would sort of pull Kate back, and Kate would say, but I just want to see, to demonstrate how awfully they were treated. And it's like,
and to be fair, it would have been true to a certain extent as well. But on the other hand, you can't, if you can't, it's like there are certain words that you use and then it makes it acceptable. And there are certain scenes that then kind of like become, so Marcia was right, to ingrain that kind of stuff was wrong.
Because when I was little, Love Thy Neighbour, the TV series, was on telly, and the white character would call the black character all sorts of names, and the two wives would go, oh, aren't they silly? And then you go to school on the Monday and everyone will call you the names from the TV series. And it's like you've literally just given racists a vocabulary to insult us.
You open that doorway. Even though Love Thy Neighbour was supposed to be kind of like, taking the mickey out of the racist white people, it kind of, it didn't hit that note with a lot of people.
Yeah, with a lot of people just thought, aha, they got their notebooks out and it's like, oh, we've got a few more names.
They got their permission slip signed.
Exactly. Yeah. It's permission. You're giving people permission, and Marcia has really, really taught me that. And also I noticed that in a lot of our kind of chats with lovely Simon and Schuster, who are publishing this novel, I noticed that they were using language to describe Daniel and Pearl in some of their stuff that Marcia had said. So, the word slave, it's an enslaved person. And I didn't realise that. Now, obviously, I totally get that. But I noticed that in some of their kind of press releases and things, they would say slaves, Marcia. So slaves, Daniel and Pearl. And I would ask them to change it because, and then I think, then Marcia would chip in and say, yeah, good. And obviously, Marcia was thinking, yeah, I've really good.
Yeah,
good.
It's understood. You've stripped away all of their identity except this one thing, the fact that they have been captured.
And that's not all they were.
Which is not all they were.
Yeah. And the thing it didn't come into the book, but something, because my area of history is Black history, and I've written a number of children's books. The aim was to try and get this kind of history on the curriculum, particularly at primary age, and trying to point out that there was no sort of generic slave. People were valued based on their skills. So if someone was a rice grower, that was the most valuable skill because growing rice is really hard. So people didn't just grab people and put them to work. Okay, you can grow rice. Oh, you're a carpenter. Oh, you're a blacksmith. Excellent. You are more valuable doing all these things. So the idea that people were just generic slaves is wrong. It's wrong. It's literally denying any of their humanity. And that's what I wanted to get away from. And also the fact that Black history started long before enslavement.
Which is what we tried to bring into the book.
Yeah.
That was really important.
When I was reading the Blackbird of St Giles, and I can't remember who says it. Someone in the beginning says something about the Moors. And immediately in my head, I'm like, my dad always used to talk about the Moors, because I think there's this feeling that this is Black history, it begins with slavery. And there's nothing prior to that. And I'm like, no, my dad used to talk to me all about the Moors and Black, in Black history and how far it goes back. So even from some people are surprised when they find out that, there's been Black people in England since the Roman times. Yeah. They're surprised. Why? They're like, what do you mean? You didn't just come over on the Windrush? I'm like, no, they've been knocking around.
Septimus Severus, a Roman emperor in Britain, was Black. He's the one who built Hadrian's Wall. And this is the kind of history that I'm trying to get across. The fact that our children growing up in schools will never hear. You'd only hear about that if you were doing a doctorate. And it's why is that not in
not more common
basic curriculum? Why do we do the Tudors every 5 minutes?
Again and again.
And it's you can find space for Henry and all his evilness with all his wives, but you can't find space for all these basic.
No, it's really important. I think it's quite interesting. A lot of people, these DNA tests that people get, the ancestry.com, and there's loads of people who kind of can't believe that they've got 4% kind of North African blood or Algerian blood or Nigerian blood, and it is because at some point over kind of 2,000 years ago, some Black Roman legionnaire intermarried with the local, maybe not intermarried, had to go with the local population.
Had relations. They had relations.
The interesting thing about Rome is, your skin, exactly as Marcia said, your skin colour didn't matter in ancient Rome. It was what you brought to the table in terms of your skills, your abilities, your craft, your nous, all of that. And that is really fascinating. And I think that the really dreadful thing that happened in the 18th century and a little bit before is that, people forgot that, people who they were kind of transporting across the Atlantic were people first. That's, that they became seen as something, they became seen as a commodity.
Yeah, but I'd sort of disagree slightly with you there. It wasn't that people forgot. There was a deliberate process of dehumanization in order to justify slavery. And that process was a pseudo-scientific body of work which said they're not as intelligent, they're basically animals, so it's okay to treat them like this. Whereas slavery was started in terms of Black slavery. It's it's quite easy to find them if they run away. That was it. It's excellent. So that was the justification. And then it was and by the way, they can they don't die as easily as the Irish. They practiced on the Irish. Oh well, they keep dying. They're quite robust. And it's okay, but now we need a philosophical justification for what we're about to do. So it's okay, we will argue that they are not very intelligent. We will argue that the Bible says it's okay. And so you come up with this huge body of work, a huge area of scientific body of work, which is still with us. And that's the thing that So there's a book called The Bell Curve, which about 30 years ago, some American scientists were basically arguing black people are stupid. There's no point in any welfare programs because you will never raise them out of the mire of their own making. And it's that intellectual justification which is still with us, but nobody, people think, oh, it was accidental. No, it wasn't. It was very deliberate.
Very intentional.
It was a process of justifying enslaving other human beings. When America became independent, the black people were considered 2/3 of a man. And it's like, no, that's weird.
They had to change the amendment. They had to change the constitution.
Count them. Yeah.
Really? Didn't know.
Yeah. The Southern Democrats wanted, they didn't want black people to have the vote, but they wanted to be able to count them. So the Southern Democrats could have more votes. But so we can't count them as a whole person. I know 2/3. And that research done, or those justifications that were brought out by the Americans were then later used by the Nazis to justify what they did to the Jews. So there's a conference, I think it was in Berlin, over a weekend where they said, okay, how are we going to define what is Jewish? Because if you're going to exterminate people based on being Jewish, you have to identify them. And so they looked at the American model, which was one drop. If you have one drop of black blood, that makes you black. And the Nazis said, I think they've gone a bit too far. We'll go for grandparents. So if you've got a Jewish grandparent, that makes you Jewish. So they had to have a measuring.
They need criteria.
Yeah, and they decided that what the Americans did, no, we can't go that far. Because if you're going to find one drop of Jewish history, they thought, well, we'll probably all get killed then.
That was pushing it.
I know I'm ranting. I'm on my soapbox. It's a podcast.
You can see why we had such fun, can't you? This is like,
I always feel like whatever you do, whatever project you take on, you should learn from it. And I think, and also I feel like it's always a skill when you're writing historical fiction that it doesn't feel like a history lesson, if that makes sense. You're not just given facts upon facts upon facts upon facts, because the story is important. Because Kate, even when you was mentioning the people doing their DNA, DNA, I did it before Christmas. My dad was like, why are you spending money on that? Like that, where you're from. I'm like, I know, but I like history. I want to know.
Yeah, exactly. What did you find out?
Well, firstly, they had a deal on, which is why I did it. Because I wasn't paying that.
Found out that they had a deal.
They had a deal on, so I did it. But like the parts of, so my family's from Grenada, but when they do the origins, and obviously most of it is West Africa and Central Africa. Like I already knew that anyway, because you kind of work out, depending on what island you are in the Caribbean, where you came from in Africa. But the interest, and then also I knew that on my dad's side we have Scottish, in class where Matheson comes from. Yeah. So that wasn't a surprise. And I knew my mum already told me that her great grandmother or great great grandmother was French. So that came up. But it was the Greek. I was like, where's the Greek? Where's the Greek come from? Yeah. We're looking at him, we're like, where Greek? I have no idea. So Greek and Portuguese, that was the surprise. But the West Africa and Central Africa, that didn't come as a surprise. But then what my brother was saying when I could obviously like shared it with him, both of them, and it shows where you ended up. And we just went straight from West Africa straight to Grenada and Venezuela. And my brother just said, the thing is, right, it wasn't a cruise, was it? It's like he ended up in Grenada. And you're like, we can laugh at it, but it's like it's true. We didn't go there by choice.
Yeah,
we ended up in. There's a reason why we ended up in Grenada and Venezuela.
Yeah.
Which is crazy.
And I think it's fascinating that you just mentioned that your surname is Scottish, Matheson.
Yeah.
Because my name, Hutchinson, is also Scottish. My mother's maiden name, Robertson, is also Scottish. And again, it's the tentacles of history. So unlike other parts of the British Empire, Scotland wasn't conquered by Britain. They actually had a treaty to join. And when you read that treaty, there's a really important clause in the treaty which says, in relation to the Scots, and we can have access to the empire and the Caribbean plantations. It's like that was a big part of it. It was like, we'll join forces with you, and can we please get access to all of the riches of the Caribbean? So a huge number of Scots as soon as that treaty was signed, went over to the Caribbean, hence our names.
Hence
And in
Matheson.
fact, the sequel that we're writing now, that turns on an important plot point, doesn't it, Marcia?
Indeed it does. My learned friend.
It does.
Right, you know, Marcia said in the beginning that, you know, she was, areas of expertise would be, hers would be Black history and yours is London history of London. Did you know about the Blackbirds of St Giles before you started the project?
I did, there's something important to say about the Blackbirds of St Giles is that Blackbirds doesn't refer to colour. It refers to kind of like the fact that St Giles was a rookery, and a rookery was kind of a place where very poor people, there was nowhere else for them to go. It was the depths of Georgian London. So the people who were living in St Giles, there was a distinct Black community living there, and they were, well, as Marcia will know, they were kind of often former servants who were dismissed and had nowhere else to go. And also, as Daniel in the book, former people who'd fought for the British Army, either as in the Navy or actually as Daniel does in the army. And when they arrived in Britain, they were promised freedom, you know, when they arrived in Britain, because, you know, you've served the crown. But then because they weren't born in Britain, they had no pension. They were not given, they weren't considered full members of the forces because they weren't born in this country. So they would end up in the rookery as well. Also in the rookery, there were loads of Scots who were displaced by the Highland clearances, who just kind of came straight down the Great North Road. And the first place they came to in London was the St Giles Rookery, because Tottenham Court Road is the end of the Great North Road. It's where the rookery is. So, you know, they'd get off the road and there they'd be. Ireland at the time, Ireland was treated incredibly badly by Britain. And in fact, Irish people were also considered, I think, as Marcia hinted earlier, as kind of like little more than savages. And they tried to escape from especially kind of like areas like Dublin. So they came to the rookery as well. And poor vagrant people, you know, people who kind of like just, you know, people who kind of who just fall on hard times, they all ended up in the rookery. And what united them all was poverty, not skin colour, poverty and kind of just a desperate desire to live. And they huddled together. And the rookery, the word rookery comes, I think it is the kind of genesis of the word to rook somebody, which is to kind of like trick them. And so people who lived in the rookery were seen as thieves and vagrants and vagabonds. But in the reality of it, they were just people trying to live. They were people trying to kind of put a roof over their heads and survive in the harshest circumstances possible. So I did know about the St Giles Rookery because I love London's history. And I, you know, kind of, and I think I'm really taking up a lot of space here, but the interesting thing about Marcia and I's book is that I think a lot of history books look at kind of like the posh salons and the posh lords and ladies and the kind of like the kind of Jane Austen type history where it's all kind of like sumptuous dresses and ball gowns and things. And well, I think a point of distinction about our book is not just its kind of Black point of view, but also the fact that we're looking at really poor people. They are not inhabiting the kind of like the highest echelons of society. They may kind of butt into them, but they are really trying to survive. That's kind of...
And if I can just comment on something you mentioned about these people who fought for the British Army, but they didn't get pensions.
Yeah.
It has a current parallel of the Gurkhas. Yeah. They fought for the British Army. You know, Joanna Lumley had a major campaign. It's still going on. You get all these Commonwealth people who, you know, literally putting their lives on the line. And then it's like, no, you can't have a pension. What? You want citizenship? It's like, oh.
But how dare you? The cheek of you.
We didn't want to write a book about Windrush, but there are those parallels of people.
Strong parallels.
People, you know, putting their lives on the line for Britain and then being literally treated like dirt.
Dumped.
Yeah. And,
dumped.
You know, my family are people who my parents came over as part of the Windrush generation. And you see what has happened. I don't want to get too much into the sort of current politics, but when you look at what's happened to this group of people, many of whom have died before they've got any compensation. I have family members who were rounded up at dawn and put in detention camps. Immigration centres. You know, we don't call them prisons.
No,
it's not because they're worse than prisons. Because at least if you're in a prison, you know when you're going to get out.
Yeah.
But if you're in an immigration detention centre, you have no idea when you're going to get out. And it's this two-tier society where one group of people have citizenship and another group of people don't. And the group who have citizenship and rights, they almost are not willfully ignorant, but it's unaware of what's going on under your very nose.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I strongly believe that, things are cyclical. So they will come back around. So these things that we're talking about now with the Gurkhas and Windrush, they're not just in isolation. It's happened again. It's happened previously in a different guise.
Yeah.
So it's not just it's just something new. Because I remember when the whole Windrush scandal came out, and I've got my parents their original passports. So the old black or dark navy hardback passports. And my dad's one, and obviously my mum's as well, it says Grenada on it, but also underneath it says British subject. And so this is the thing, they're always British subjects if you're part of the Commonwealth, but then you come over and then there's this whole argument, they're sending people back and they say, well, you're not really British, but you came over because you were a subject.
You were invited. You were invited.
What's astonishing is that one of the reasons that the Windrush scandal was as bad as it was because officials in the Home Office did not know anything about Black history. They didn't know all of this. So there was a decision made, let's write something that gives them a quick primer on Black history. So at least they know, they're not necessarily going to read the Blackbirds or other things. And this is when Priti Patel was Home Secretary. So they commissioned a report, and the purpose of this report was to give Home Office officials the background. And you know what? The government refused to release it. They refused it. They suppressed it for 3 years, their own document that they produced to give the staff some background. And when you read it, it's brilliant. That's probably why they refused. Literally, I'm saying to Kate, look, we've got another book here. We've got another book here. It's so good because it's quite short, but it's a sort of, a quick history for people who are dealing with Windrush and other people. Yeah. And you can see why the Home Office don't want to release their own document, because it kind of it paints them in a not good light, and that's a neutral document, just facts. These are some of the facts.
Well, how do you both, as authors, when you're writing this book and also writing the sequel, how do you balance the history and the facts, but also with the telling of the story? Because it's the story of Daniel and Pearl, and I being a crime writer, I would say it's also there's a thriller aspect to it as well.
Oh, good.
All the elements. Well, so you got all the elements of a thriller. You got the deceit going on. Well, I say this uprising. You have the action. How do you balance that? Because that's a skill. Not many people can do it well. Because lots of people get bored of historical fiction because it's
my theory is. My theory is it's got to be a good story. That number one, first and foremost.
That's the through line.
And then when you've got them hooked with a good story and a good plot, you can sneak in some historical, and by the way. But if a novel was written as a sort of didactic, you must learn this, you must learn that, it's not going to work. Yeah. If it's a novel, it has to work as a story first.
It's going to turn people
off. And I think sometimes when you read novels which are sort of thinly disguised polemic, you can tell, have a sense of being manipulated as a reader. And I think I have to say, that's where Kate comes in. She can tell a good story.
Oh, thank you. I can tell our story.
I was going to ask you, Kate, because, you've written 4 historical fiction.
Actually, more. I've written.
Was it more than that? It's always more than that.
7. This is my 8th. I wrote 2 history books for kids as well. And I also wrote Fine Shade, which came out a couple of years ago, which is sort of a gothic melodrama, which is set in the Victorian. Is that always historical? Always historical.
What attracts you to it? What drew you to writing historical fiction?
Because I find the past much more comforting than the present. I really do. I think you can control the past in a way you can't control the present. And I love history. I always loved history. I did history at school. I did history, English, art, and law for my A-levels. And they're really all about the part. Well, art wasn't, but they're all about the part. Actually, no, even art. I used to sort of draw people in costume. I love costumes. I think that's what it is. I love costumes. So in my head, when we're writing up, when I'm writing up from our notes and kind of using it as a basis, I see it all, in front of me, and they've all got their costumes on, and they're all kind of, and I love it. I love doing it. But I do think that the present world is a very scary, frightening place, and I don't understand where it's going. So there's a kind of a comfort and a certainty in the past that I kind of retreat to, and it's a comfort zone, even though it's not very comfortable for the character.
You know, what I was going to ask you, is that, you know, the past can be comforting in the sense because, say, we know it, we know what's happened.
That's what it is.
But then also, isn't it also, say, discomforting when you can kind of see the mistakes that were made in the past being repeated again in the present? Yeah. You see where the template came from.
Yeah, actually, I mean, I hope it's not didactic. I don't think it is. But, you know, when we were writing it, we were really very aware of the Windrush parallels for Daniel and Pearl in what we were writing. It you know, it kind of just shone through. I think Hilary Mantel said something quite interesting about writing the past, you know, with the kind of the whole Wolf Hall thing. She spent, you know, so much time researching. So she knew that period. She knew Henry VIII's court inside out. And then she would just put all of her research away and write. So kind of she only kept in her head the essentials that, you know, needed to push the story along. Because I think if you put too much, if you kind of like fall prey to putting too much of your historical knowledge into the book, the reader is just going to think, oh, Christ, this is boring. Get to the story.
Listeners, it's time for a very short break. If you're enjoying this conversation with Nadine Matheson and want to help keep the podcast going, why not buy me a cup of coffee? Your support goes such a long way in keeping these conversations flowing. Just check out the link in the show notes. Well, not only is it boring, it's like you can tell. You can tell when a writer's just
slipping in a fact.
Yeah, well, not even that. They're just like, I'm determined. I'm going to put in everything I've learned about this situation, and I'll put everything in the book. And it's so obvious. And you're like, for God's sake, you don't need to prove yourself to me. Just tell me the story.
Tell me a story. Exactly. Which I hope is what we did. I really hope that's what we did.
No, I think, when I was reading the opening, I was just like, oh my God. Like, who wrote the opening? Was it collaborative?
No, it was collaborative. We both knew exactly how it opened. And I kind of like did a first draft, and then that opening went back between us, I think about 5 or 6 times until we were both, you know, kind of, you know.
Because I think one of the things that sort of my area of expertise is, and I know I keep coming back to it, but I went to a stately home in Bristol, and there was some statement about, it wasn't Colston, but it was someone similar who, you know, their money came from enslavement. And there was a placard in the house saying he was a kindly slave owner.
I bet he was.
And I was just like, oh, come on now. It's a contradiction in terms. You're going to...
It's such an oxymoron to be kind and have enslaved people
to work for you for the rest of their lives without pay. What do you have to do to a human being to get them to that stage? And this is one of the things I was talking to Kate about, because when I was researching for my children's books, which are sort of textbooks for schools, I thought, how much of this am I going to put in? But there were literally instruction manuals on seasoning slaves. And the instruction manual said, okay, when you get a group that's come across, you look at them and you find not the strongest man, but the second strongest one. And you beat him to death in front of everyone, so they know what's going to happen to them. This is torture and murder, but you make sure everyone's watching. So first of all, you're going to traumatize them. And then there was a list of suitable punishments for things. So it's like, okay, if they eat the sugarcane that they are harvesting, you pull their teeth out. Then they will. Then they can't eat sugar.
You can't eat the sugarcane.
But the horrific things that were done to people, and when slavery ended, there was a sort of almost a tacit agreement between formerly enslaved people and their former slave holders. Let's never speak of this again. So the shackles and all of that were literally buried. Let's bury them. Let's put them away. And then people dug them up, and you find shackles that are tiny, and you realise they've been designed for children. And one of the incidents that come in the book is just the horrific things that were done, and because we want to spare the horses and spare people's blushes, we don't tell children what was done. So you get this situation where people think, oh, they must have liked being slaves. It must have suited them. And it's like, no, that the horrific torture that was done is literally swept under the carpet. There's one guy who kept a diary. And when you read his diary, you realize that he committed about 3,000 rapes, partly because he got paid. It's like, if you impregnate these women, you will get a bonus because you're producing more stock.
But none of that matters because, he was a kind and lovely slave. In fact, there's no kindness in dehumanizing people.
God, no.
Yeah, and another thing that I wanted to is this was all commercial. This was you can make lots more money if you don't pay your workforce. You can also practice techniques that might not be acceptable in the UK. So a lot of the techniques which were then used in the Industrial Revolution were perfected in the Caribbean. So sugar, when it ripens, spoils very, very quickly. So when you're harvesting it, you have to do it 24/7 over a sort of 2-week period and have the presses working. And if somebody's arm gets ripped off, it's like, well, we can't stop the presses.
Yeah. You've got to sit over there.
Literally had by the side of the machine a machete to chop the arm off so that the machines would keep working, because the sugar will spoil. You know, if you're setting sugar and you turn the machine.
It's business.
It's business.
It's just a business.
And the production line techniques that were developed in the Caribbean were brought over to England and used in the Industrial Revolution. So it was a testing ground for, and that's one of the things that helped Britain get the amount of money it had. Firstly, it didn't have to pay its workers, and secondly, you can practice lots of dodgy stuff on people, but that's never acknowledged.
No, there's always such a gap, because I love history. Same thing, like I did my history. Obviously, you do history GCSE. I did my history A level.
We all did history A levels.
Yeah, I love.
Now you see, history girls.
I love history. I did American studies and history, and you'll always, doing all of that. And I've always been a reader. So I remember in secondary school, and my history teacher said, we're going to study, I don't know if he said we're going to study American history or something. I thought, oh, good. I'm off. I went to the library and I got all the books. So I knew that period of history would involve talking about Black history and slavery. So I thought, oh, I know about this and I'm going to get my books. And we got to school and we just leapfrogged over it and just went on. So it's like, it's like you completely missed out this whole section, but that was just the way it was. I think throughout the whole educational system, there's always such a big, massive gap in history, in British history, around slavery. So that's why you had all this uproar and complaints about
which is why I started an educational publishing company, which I ran for 15 years, Primary Colours, and it was about getting that history back into schools and making sure that children learnt about this stuff. When I did A-level history, I was one of, I think, 15 of us doing A-level, and of course the only Black girl. And I remember when our history teacher said, right, today we're doing the scramble for Africa, and they all just turned and looked at me like, hello. But it was really sort of, difficult. Oh, by the way, I did art and English as well, Kate. So we did.
You see, I knew we had a lot in common.
We're finding out all about each other on your podcast.
No, I know. But and law, so the pair of you are sort of former lawyers, and I'm did it to A-level.
Can I ask a really practical question? Because writers always ask whether they're planners or pantsers. What are you both? Are you both planners? Because I don't know how it could work if one was someone who just, I need to plan everything, and someone else is just like, I'm just going to write and just see what happens.
Writing together, we're planners.
Yeah, I think you have to be, don't you?
Yeah. You couldn't do it in any other way.
But what I find, oddly enough, is the planning gets a bit pantsy, if that doesn't sound mad.
Yeah.
So we got together to write book 2, and I was just like, ideas, fire, and this and that could happen, and that could happen. I'm like, are you taking notes, Kate? Because I can't remember what I say 5 minutes in 5 minutes time. Literally, in a morning, we had the second novel planned, because when I'm with Kate, the ideas are coming so thick and fast, and they're sparking, and it's like that alchemy when you get with
and then we could do that, and then
when you get with your writing partner. I can now see why, say, screenwriters work in pairs, because I could come up with lots of possible legal twists that would move the plot along. And I don't know if you've heard of the Ship the Song, where
and wink, she did.
So it was. I don't think I've ever had an experience like that. That because Kate came up to Manchester and we planned 2 days. We would just sit in a hotel in 2 days and work. We had it done in the first morning. We got there and it's like you've run a marathon. You're like, right, wow.
And Marcia was so exhausted, she had to go and have a lie down.
I don't think people understand. Writing is exhausting.
Hard.
It's hard work. I'm listening to this other podcast, and she was basically saying, she held up her book and she said, it's not easy. this is not an easy process. Writing a book is hard work. There are times you're sitting at your desk surrounded by absolute chaos and you're like, why the hell am I doing this? Why did I agree to this? Did you ever have those moments, either of you? Why did I agree to do this?
No, actually, no. I really love it. I would look forward to.
Yeah, I've had that on my solo work because you've got nobody, just you.
Yeah.
The joy of Blackbirds is you've got somebody whose shoulder you can cry on when it's all going to be, oh my God, what? So there's always someone to talk to.
Yeah.
Whereas that the loneliness of the solo writer is it's just you and your typewriter and your ideas, and you're looking at your typewriter. In my case, writing, bawling, going, why am I doing this? You know, why did I decide to do this?
I think it's quite liberating having a co-writer. Because you're not entirely responsible, are you? You kind of like, if you come to a dead end, you kind of immediately have, your second brain or your other brain to kind of talk to, and it's.
You think you can't avoid writer's block in a sense, because if you do,
it was never any
hit a wall. Yeah, there's someone
never
you can say.
If anything, it was kind of the opposite. I'd say, okay, what about the thing? And have you put the thing in under this? And with like one of the things with the second book is. Pearl works in a theatre, and I was talking about. I said we need a chapter on makeup and how she finds it hard to find stage makeup for herself, and how what she has to do to change the lipstick to suit her, and that fed into a plot point. And I'm like, now we're motoring, and so it's it's the opposite of writer's block. I find I've got writer's diarrhea.
But you know the makeup thing, because you always say everything's cyclical, because it always just comes around again. Yeah. And so, so Pearl's in the theatre is like trying to find your match, trying to find the right foundation. Yeah. And I was explaining to calling my nieces and my goddaughter, so I took them shopping for one of their birthdays, so a couple of months ago. And I call her my niece, Maya, she calls, in her phone, she has me saved as Auntie Sephora, because I have a lot of makeup. So she's just cheeky. But I had to explain to her. I said, for me, there was a time I said, it wasn't until I was maybe, because I'm 48, and it wasn't until maybe I was like in my 40s where I could walk into a shop and just pick out a shade of makeup and not have to go to the go to the lady and say, have you got a shade that matches me? And they go for everything. They're like, no, we haven't got anything. And you're having to mix and match and blend just to find something that matches. And you say, and it's so, I said, only in my 40s, I've been able to walk into a store and say, oh, can you have shade B80? Like, oh, yes, here it is. There's a whole range.
Yeah. That's it was interesting. That's what we had to do with Pearl, really, didn't we? That's, kind of, and actually, as Marcia said, the fact that Pearl needs a specific shade of lip color or carmine to put on her lips to make, because when all the candles in the theatre are on her, and that became an interesting plot point, didn't it? When we finally worked out what she would do with it and things. I can't give too much away because
I know. It's always whenever I do these podcasts, we start talking about the book, we're like, like we always talk around things because you don't want to reveal the spoilers. You want people to discover.
No. But it does. The book too, which we kind of planned in that kind of flurry of excitement, really just kind of rips off where book one ends. So, but it's Pearl's book. So the first book was more or less told we told it from Daniel's point of view, and the sequel, which is The Nightingale of Covent Garden, is told from Pearl's point of view. So it's.
In your acknowledgements, you said that, I don't know which one of you said it. It could have been a joint thing. You said you had to take some liberties.
Yes.
With the book. I won't ask you to say what liberties, but how did you go about taking liberties? Because I always feel that I do it with my police procedurals. I said, look, I have to take liberties because if I write too close to the law, if I try and keep the story to the law, I get stuck. I write myself into corners. So I have to be flexible with it. But I always say, as long as the rest of the story is authentic, then people can follow you when you do take liberties. So how were you taking liberties?
Well, I think that Pearl and Daniel are treated much better than they really would have been. That I think we've not softened because it's still pretty awful what happens to them. But I think they would never have been given the opportunities that they have. I don't think that would have happened. although in a sort of crazy, almost Dickensian way, it kind of like, it's one of those like, oh, incredible sort of start points, whoosh points when they get the inheritance. But I think that initial inheritance it's probably a liberty, you know.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, we make it very clear that it's a debt of honour, and that's why they get the inheritance, which kind of like kickstarts the action.
When I read it, I was like, oh, okay. He's giving him everything.
Oh, I'm glad he said that. So
I was like, not just a horse. He's giving him everything.
Not just a horse.
But you know, that's a human thing, isn't it? Because that couple really love them, and they've got no kids of their own, and they really love them. And also, it's a debt of honour because Daniel has saved his life.
Yeah. Deep down, he probably knew his brother was a bastard. Sorry.
Yes, he probably. Well, he hopes he isn't. He hopes he's changed, Marcia.
Someone always, but you know what I think Marcia was saying earlier in the conversation when you were talking about, you know, saying having a character spit at either Daniel and Pearl, and you say you're not going to have this, I don't know, this aggression, like, or you can't have it on every single page. And I always think, you know, because me and my brothers, more the family and friends, when we're talking about microaggressions, I said racism is not someone screaming the N-word at you every single day. It can be really, really, really subtle. In the sense that, I said, look at my name, Nadine Mapperton. I said, I've lost count of the amount of times I've gone into an interview. My brothers have said the same. My brother's called Gavin, one's called Jason. I think Gavin is Welsh. I'm not sure where Jason comes from. Nadine is French. I said, they're not expecting us to walk into a room. And there's that moment, and like you'll see, it's like a little flash in the eyes, like,
that's what I was expecting.
And it's these little microaggressions that you have to think of. Is this the hill I'm going to die on? Do I want to bring this one up?
Can I motor through this?
Not long ago, and I'm going to name the place, the Randolph Hotel in Oxford, which is this posh hotel in Oxford. I was there with friends. We're having breakfast, and it was just gorgeous, and this dining room, this wonderful. I was going up to the buffet, and I was dressed like I am today. You can't see, but I'm wearing a purple leather skirt, which is relevant. And as I walked up to the buffet, somebody said to me, "Excuse me." And I'm like, "Yeah." She said, "Can we have some more cutlery at table 4?"
I know you told me. Shocking.
And I am in no way dressed in any way remotely like the serving staff at that hotel. No. And I remember Gina Yashere saying, you know, what is it about me that you think that makes you think I shouldn't be in first class? Because she was questioning me for influence. Mm-hmm. And, you know, afterwards I wished I'd said, what is it about me that makes you think I'm a server? Oh. And at the time I just said, I don't work here. But my white friends who were with me looked at me and like, shit. And I'm like, yeah, happens every day.
But it goes for what you say. It's like you've got to choose. It's only like you have to choose the hill you want to die on, but also it's exhausting. When people of colour, Black people, Asian people, whatever, say it's exhausting. It's because it's the same thing over and over and over and over again. And I don't have the energy to be fighting it every single day. But
and what Kate was saying about being a well-meaning white liberal, and yet still kind of putting it wrong. I don't mean that literally. I remember it was in Brixton. It was a while back, and somebody selling the Socialist Worker said, I mean, there was some typical racist outrage that had happened, and they came up to me like, buy the Socialist Workers, a white woman with, you know, white people with dreadlocks. Anyway, we won't go there. But anyway, she was like, do you want to buy a copy of the Socialist Worker? And I said, no, thanks. And she looked at me, she said, don't you care about racism? And I'm like, at the time I was thinking, you know, you can't qualify as a solicitor if you've got a conviction for violence.
No, you can't.
So I can't slap her.
You have to walk away. But the reason why I bring it up, I was talking before about it being a balancing act, you know, having the history and the facts. But also it's the same way I feel about, I say with violence in my books. I say, okay, I write police procedurals. They can be a bit graphic. I say a bit. They can be graphic. Yeah. But I've always felt from the very beginning that you don't need to have violence on every single page. If I'm showing the violence, there needs to be a point to it. It just can't be there just to fill up space. Yeah. And I think the same probably applies when you're showing the discrimination in the Blackbirds of St Giles. When you're showing it, there has to be a point to it. When you're showing those acts of aggression, it just can't be there because, oh, well, you know, we've got Black people, they're here.
It's not gratuitous.
It can't be gratuitous.
No. Yeah, it's like in these novels where all the murder victims are nubile young women, and the camera hands across their naked body. You're like, really?
Yeah, really. No, it's you have to add hope. There's and also you have to have some lightness as well. I mean, I think there are some comedy moments that we got in there. Some kind of like, and I think also, the love that Daniel and Pearl have. That kind of like the bond between them. I think at its heart, it's about humanity, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's about human decency. That's a really important thing, that despite all this dreadful world that they're moving through, they've got each other and they've got other people who are on their side as well. So.
Yeah, so
if
I think it was Martin Luther King said, the arc of history bends towards justice, and you have to just hope that's true, especially in the current
moment.
climate.
I went on a news detox after the US election, and literally the result, and I was like, right, I'm done, because I'm very much a political junkie. Like, I'll just consume everything. But another thing, I was surprised at myself at how easily I just shut off from everything. I removed all like the news apps on my phone, turned off the notifications, all the podcasts I used to subscribe to. I unfollowed them because I was just so enraged by the nonsense result.
That's what I mean, like the comfort of the past. That's where I seek refuge from.
Yeah. No, but that's the thing. But then, I've come back into the new year, so I'm like, okay, I'll slowly turn on one app, slowly look at a news app. And this week I was like, what? Why? Like, why? Like, nothing. Because I just I've opened the door to like a burning inferno. And I just
a universe going on out there. It's bizarre. I mean, I just my husband stopped watching the news completely. He won't. He just kind of embargo.
Yeah, which are going back. Yeah, which are going back to like the Blackbirds of St Giles. Like you said, you do kind of need hope. You need to see that there is light out there. Yeah. Because when you open your own front door, it's like, this is just lunacy. Let me just close the door.
It is.
Stay inside.
Completely.
I think there's, especially as a writer, there's this element of protecting your peace of mind.
Yeah.
You have to get to a place where you can function. And as a creative, even though, like you might have got another day job as well, you just can't be in this mire all day long. No. I write partly to sort of process what's happening, but I'm really clear about protecting. If you were an opera singer, you protect your voice. If you're a writer, you have to protect the peace of mind in your brain that enables you to write.
That must be really pertinent for you, Marcia, with the Mercy Step as well, which is coming out. Because I know that's very much about you. I mean, I know it's kind of fiction, but it is also very personal to you, isn't it? So
it's loosely based on my early life. And today, literally, whilst this podcast has been going on, I've just got a message to say it's in the bookseller today. They've made they made the trade announcement today.
Oh, well done. Congratulations.
Well done.
Thank you. So that's quite hard, especially when it's because my other writing career is very much contemporary fiction, and it's. I'm an auto-fiction writer, so it's loosely based on it. Everything I've written is incidents based on my own life. And like Kate, I've written about 3 or 4 now. It's just the first one is coming out.
Yeah. What would both of your advice be to new writers? Because we talk about protecting your piece. And I think I say new writers, whether your debut or whether you've been doing it for 15 years, you're always looking at what's going on around you. And you can't help but have that infiltrate and be affected by it. So what would your advice be?
Do it
to protect your peace.
Well, actually, I think I don't have to, because it's very much a fictional world that I live in. So I go there to escape, really. But to all new writers, or all writers really, your enemy is procrastination. That is your kind of like, you can talk forever about being a writer or wanting to be a writer, but actually at the end of the day, you have to sit down and do it. And there's no, and it is, as you said earlier, it is exhausting. It's quite hard sitting in a chair for hours and hours, having ideas and transferring them.
The advice I would give a new writer is it might take a long time to find your method. So don't assume because someone else writes 1,000 words every day, using a fountain pen with green ink, that you have to write. That's not how you might need to write. And that you sort of so often, I mean, I think there's a podcast called How I Write, and it's lots of writers talking about their process. And listen to as many as you can, and then find your own. It will be personal. Because my method of writing is dictating. I literally go to the park, get my phone out, and I walk around and I dictate because I'm a lawyer. And then when I get back, I dictate straight into Google Docs, but it's all a bit gooky. And I realize I have to walk and talk. That's when I'm doing a first draft. Future drafts, obviously, I'm doing it, but it took me a while to work out that's how I write best. I take the dog with me, so when I come back, half of the what I've written is, Pug, stop that, come back. No, I'm sorry, my dog. All the interactions, and so I have to go through it very soon after I get back, or it doesn't make any sense. And it took me a while, and it's like I finally, 3 or 4 novels in, got into my groove. So it takes
you a while to work out the sort of writer that you are.
And there's no right or wrong way.
Exactly.
I think people feel very hidebound about, they must get up in the morning and kind of like have a cup of coffee at 6 a.m. and then go to their writing room. And that's not enough. And but no, you just do you. That is the really important thing.
I'm sitting there pulling a face because being on social media, I think it was that last year I kept seeing this group of people, the 5 a.m. club. I'm like, what are you doing at 5 a.m.? They're like, at 5 a.m. I'm like, listen, I mean, okay, I will get up at 6 and I will walk because I feel that I spend far too much time sitting at my desk, so I need to move my body. So I'll
really
walk in the morning. So I'm up at 6 and I'm out of the house at 6:30. I'm not getting up at 5. I'll sit at my desk and work. I work out that does not work for me. And over the Christmas break, because I had a deadline to deliver my edits before Christmas, and I got it done. I even got it done a week early. But it's like thank you. I was very proud of myself, but also I was exhausted though. I felt the same way as if I'd done a trial. It's so intense, and I was exhausted. But then over the Christmas break, I'm scanning social media and I'm seeing people saying, oh, I've written 1,000 words today. I've written 2,000 words today. I'm at my desk writing. I'm like, I'm sitting here. Really? I don't even know. I'm sitting in my pajamas. I'm watching Empire Strikes Back and I'm eating cheese and crackers and eating quality. But there was a little part of me thinking, maybe I should be writing. Maybe I should be at my desk. But I was like, no, I've done my bit.
You stay there eating the cheese and crackers in your pajamas. It's good for your mental health.
Like, if it boils down to that thing, sometimes you have to ignore what is going on around you as a writer and just work out your process and work out what works.
I think a lot of it is performative and makes you feel quite guilty. I think people
it does. I feel guilty.
Yeah. They get a bit of a high about going on to social media and sort of saying, here I am working. And I would be very surprised if a lot of those people really have written, 3,000 words a day or whatever, and kind of like, I think it's the way they motivate themselves a lot of the time, which is great.
I told myself I was going to write all that in December. I haven't written anything at all in December.
No, I haven't either, Marcia. Whatsoever. It's a good point for me to tell you, Marcia, that I haven't done it.
I turned in a manuscript to my agent at the end of November, and I thought, well, you can take some time off now.
It's important to take time off. But I only came back to my desk Monday, which is 6th of January, and in my my WhatsApp group with my writer friends, I literally said to them, I don't know what words are. Like, I don't know how to put words together. I haven't used my brain for 3 weeks.
I've got word blind.
Yeah, I sometimes, I don't know if you two get that. I just sometimes get the feeling of, I don't think I can't write anymore. That book that I just finished was a fluke. And now I'll never be able to do it again.
But you feel like that for about 2 days, and then all of a sudden, especially you, Marcia, you'll get some kind of like brilliant idea that kind of like starts fluttering in your mind. Next thing I know, I get an email from Marcia, or we do a Zoom or something. And she said, "I've had this idea for a book," and it's like, and she'll tell me, and I go, "Wow, that's amazing!" But you will never do that. You will never not write again.
No, and I think that's the thing you have to, like, if anyone takes anything from this podcast, like, you will never not write again. So even though I had that moment on Monday when I was WhatsApping everyone going, I don't know how to plot, I don't know what a story is, I don't know how to put words together. Literally last night, like, I had this light bulb moment. I was like, oh, that's the book idea. This is what I need to do. And then I'm excited for the next day. So, it will come.
I think we all had cheese brain. That's what it is. Cheese brain.
I had cheese brain, Quality Street brain, celebration, ham brain. I just had everything. Right, before I go on to the final set of questions, because I always ask these last 4 questions to everyone, and I'm going to keep the same thing going and ask you, but I'm going to split it. Marcia and Kate. I'm going to ask Marcia to tell the listeners of the conversation about the Blackbirds of St Giles. And Kate, I'm going to ask you to tell the listeners about the sequel, which comes out next year. So I'm asking you to do your elevator pitch, which is a bit cheeky.
Well, my elevator pitch is Peaky Blinders meets Bridgerton.
Oh, that's good.
And it's a rollicking tale of Daniel, a soldier who ends up in Britain, loses his inheritance, and the book is, can he get it back? And can he protect his sister from the various predations of Georgian England?
Okay, and Kate, the sequel?
Well, the sequel is, I would say, Jane Austen meets Peaky Blinders and Bridgerton, which I'm just making from Marcia. And it picks up Daniel's sister Pearl's story as she develops a career on the London stage in Covent Garden. But there is darkness swirling about her, and she discovers a lot about herself, and she discovers a lot about the people who to trust and who not to trust. And she also discovers a lot about love.
Oh, right. Before I go on to the last set of questions, what have you... Oh, okay. Oh, Marcia's going now.
Oh, I have to go. Oh.
It's all right. I'll leave that bit. So Marcia has to leave us. So we'll say goodbye to her. But I will ask Kate these questions. But Marcia, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure.
I'm going to see Marcia later. She's coming to stay with me tonight.
It's wonderful. If I didn't have to rush off to a photo shoot at the Guardian, darlings.
Marcia's having her moment now. She's having her moment. Go and do your photo shoot, my
Go and enjoy it.
Yeah, it's been lovely talking to you, Nadine. It's been just wonderful.
It has. And I wish you all the success. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you.
So I will let you go, and Kate and I will have our last closing moments together.
Okay. See you later, Marcia.
Bye. So, Kate, these are your last questions for you. Okay. Are you an introvert or extrovert, or a hybrid of the two?
I am an extroverted introvert. So that's what I am. I kind of like, I appear on the surface to be all singing or dancing, but inside I'm kind of generally dying and thinking, oh God, no, I did that wrong. I went too far. Oh, don't look at me. But do look at me. Please look at me. So that's what I am.
Okay. What challenge or experience in your life shaped you the most?
I think my mum dying 20 years ago. That sounds a bit depressing, and it was awful and terrible. And my mum was lovely, absolutely lovely. But I kind of thought at that point, I really tried hard to kind of come to terms with it. And the first book I wrote was called Kitty Peck and the Music Hall Murders. And it was about a girl from London who really liked Barbara Windsor. And my mum was really like Barbara Windsor. She was at school with Barbara Windsor, actually. Wow. And looking back, I think that she was kind of kick-ass and funny and mouthy and a real London girl. And I think it was kind of like an unconscious bringing back of my mum. And I think that's what changed me more than anything in life. It made me want to be a writer.
It did?
Yeah, it did. But it was a kind of an unconscious, almost like kind of like bringing her back into my mind. Not that she left it particularly, but I was kind of like making her live again on the page. And I think looking back, that's what I did. And that's where Kitty Peck came from. And Kitty Peck led to me being a writer.
Okay, so if you could go back to when you were 25 years old and give yourself one piece of advice, what would it be?
Oh, I don't have perms. That would be a really big piece of advice. It's going to be okay. It's going to be okay, really. But really don't have the perm. Don't go to the model night at Watford, in Clipso in Watford, and say that you want the perm, and then allow them to cut it really short and come out looking like a poodle. That would be my top piece of advice to my 25-year-old self. But no, genuinely, it's going to be okay. I think all of us, at 25, it's kind of like such a mass of conflicting emotions and worries and fears, and thinking that it's never going to be all right, and you're never going to be perfect. You're never going to meet you're never going to meet someone. You are going to be okay. It just takes time.
It's important to know. It's important to know that at 25, because at 25 you're looking around at everyone, because everyone's life is changing.
Yeah,
like all you grew up with, or you've met at uni, everyone's life is changing around you, and some are speeding ahead, and some might be behind you, and so you can't help but look at yourself like, oh my God, am I doing the right thing? What is going to happen? Well, it's all over.
It's maybe don't compare yourself to everyone else. Be you. What would your advice be to that 25?
I think the same thing. Yeah, it's going to be okay. Just keep doing what you're doing.
It just takes time. Yeah.
Yeah, it just takes time. Okay, so I think that's it. So finally, where can listeners of the conversation find you online? And Marcia.
So Marcia, well, we're both on whatever it calls itself these days. What is it? Twitter, X? X. But I think we're trying to wean ourselves off that, because
wean yourself off.
Shuddersome. But we're on Instagram as Lila Cain Books, and I am also on Instagram as Kate A. Griffin, and Marcia is also on Instagram as Marcia1 with an X. That's on Instagram.
Okay.
We're both on Blue Sky. I think we're both on Threads. It's sort of separately, but Lila Cain Books on Instagram is where we put all our joint stuff together.
This is what I wanted to ask you before we go, and what I should have asked earlier. Who is Lila Cain? That's
So originally we were going to do written by Marcia Hutchinson and Kate Griffin, or the other way around. And then our agent Eugenie said, it's quite clunky, really, and it's quite common for partnerships to have a writing name. So what would you like to be called? And immediately in that moment I said, well, my maiden name before I got married is Cain, and Marcia's daughter is called Lila. So we kind of we sort of played around with different combinations, but Lila Cain looked really nice written down.
It does.
So we thought, that's good. Let's go with that.
It's nice that it's actually related to both of you.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It could have just been you just went on the baby book app.
But it's
nice that there's a connection.
Yeah, it represents our families.
Oh, but I think that's also a theme of the book, isn't it? The Blackbird of St Giles. It's families also.
It is about family. Yeah, it's about family sticking together through thick and thin, really. So sometimes overprotectively, in the case of Daniel.
Yes.
He's a very overprotective brother.
Which is understandable, though.
Exactly. Well, she's his whole life. She's all he managed to save from the beginnings of his life. Yeah. So his little sister.
Well, I think that's a perfect time for me to say, Kate Griffin. And I've already said goodbye and thank you to Marcia.
No. I know.
Thank you, Kate Griffin.
Thank you, Nadine. It's been fantastic to meet you. It's been really fun.
Thank you so much for listening to today's conversation with Nadine Matheson. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Be sure to tune in every Tuesday for a brand new episode featuring more amazing guests. Don't forget to like, subscribe and leave a review. It really helps the podcast grow. And if you'd like to support the show, you can buy me a cup of coffee or sign up on Patreon. The links are in the show notes. And if you'd love to join the conversation as a guest, feel free to send an email to theconversation@nadinematheson.com. Thanks again for your support, and I'll catch you next time.